Each exchange shapes the final verdict. Every camera uncovers reality. Grasping your legal protections, enforcing true justice.
Give me your right arm right now.
No, let me go.
You're not going anywhere. Ease up. Hand back.
Come on, hold her still.
Please, I swear I'm just trying to get home.
Wrist behind there. Got it. Tighten it. Not secure. You're detained, ma'am.
Please, listen to me, please.
The red lights flickered overhead as Tanya Williams, a single mother of two, rushed into the McDonald's bathroom on that sweltering Thursday afternoon. Within seconds, two police officers stormed in behind her, their presence abrupt, intimidating, and without warning. "Ma'am, you're under arrest," one of them barked, slamming the metal door behind them. Tanya's heart pounded as she struggled to comprehend the accusation. A petty trespass, they said, for being in the bathroom too long, too long. The words echoed in her head as her stomach dropped. Too long. The handcuffs clamped around her wrists. Too long. By the time her family received the news, Tanya was already gone. Too long, too long, too long. The McDonald's bathroom, a place meant for a brief pause in the day, had become the center of a tragic storm. But this wasn't just another police altercation. This was a moment that would ignite a nationwide conversation about racial profiling, abuse of power, and the cost of a single misjudgment. Too long, too long, too long. And by the end, justice would arrive in the form of an $8 million lawsuit, a vindication for her family, and a chilling reminder of the stakes at play when authority goes unchecked. Now, before we dive deeper into Tanya's story, take a moment to like, comment, and share this story with someone who needs to understand what happens when ordinary moments turn catastrophic. Stay with us as we uncover the events that led to tragedy and the fight for justice that followed. It started innocently. Tanya had driven her two kids through the heat of the city, picking up lunch for the family, trying to make the day a little easier. She parked, entered the restaurant, and led her children toward the restroom. The line was short, and the place was bustling with families, teenagers, and the usual mid-afternoon crowd. But as Tanya stepped into the bathroom, a security camera caught the arrival of Officers Collins and Harper, two uniformed men with a reputation in the neighborhood for strict and sometimes aggressive enforcement. They didn't approach her calmly. They didn't ask politely. They barged into the restroom, ignoring the presence of others, and demanded Tanya step aside. Confused and scared, she asked, "Why? What's going on?" The officer's reply was cold, clipped. "You've been in here too long. That's against the rules." Tanya tried to explain, trying to calm her children who were now crying in the background. But the officers were relentless. They seized her arms, ignoring her protests, and the struggle began. Witnesses outside the restroom heard shouting, doors banging, and the muffled cries of a mother caught in a nightmare. Someone called 911. Someone else whipped out a phone to record. In those critical moments, Tanya's breathing became labored. Officers, fixated on their perception of the rules rather than her humanity, failed to notice her struggle. Minutes passed that felt like hours. Too long, too long. By the time paramedics arrived, Tanya had already collapsed, her body giving way under the stress, fear, and physical restraint. News of her death spread quickly. Social media lit up with outrage. The image of a single mother restrained in a McDonald's bathroom by officers who had interpreted too long as a crime became a symbol of a broader crisis. Too long, too long, too long. The lawsuit would come later, a staggering $8 million verdict in favor of her family. But the initial moments, the moments we are about to explore, showed just how quickly ordinary life could turn into a public tragedy. The story of Tanya Williams was about to unravel layer by layer, revealing uncomfortable truths, small-town biases, and a system that needed accountability. The call came at 3:42 p.m. Tanya's sister, Letitia, answered her phone to a voice she would never forget. "Ma'am, we're at McDonald's. Your sister." The words stumbled, broken by the gravity of what they had to say. Tanya was gone. Gone. Just hours ago, she had been laughing with her children, telling them the fries would be worth the wait. Now she was lying in a hospital room, unresponsive, a victim of a situation that spiraled far too quickly. Her family raced to the hospital, the city streets blurring past in a haze of panic and disbelief. Her 2 children clung to Letitia, their tiny hands shaking, their faces wet with tears. "Mommy's okay, right?" one whispered. But there was no reassuring smile, no "everything's fine" to offer. Only the sterile scent of antiseptic, the hum of ventilators, and the weight of silence that screamed louder than any words. Outside the hospital, reporters had begun to gather. A tragedy was brewing into a headline, and bystanders whispered, snapping photos and recording snippets of the unfolding drama. "Another case of police overreach," someone muttered. "How long until justice?" asked another. But justice, Tanya's family quickly realized, would not come easy. Inside, the medical team worked tirelessly, but the injuries sustained during her restraint, the stress on her heart, the panic that constricted her breathing, were severe. Her children were moved aside, their small bodies trembling as they peered through the glass. "Mommy, wake up," the youngest pleaded, her voice cracking. The nurses exchanged solemn glances. Too long, too long, too long. And then the room fell still. The shockwaves didn't stop at the hospital doors. Tanya's family now faced a barrage of questions, accusations, and the gnawing uncertainty of what had gone wrong. Why did the officers act with such aggression? Why did nobody notice she was struggling? And most urgently, why did it take so long for emergency help to make a difference? The answers were tangled in policies, prejudices, and a chilling disregard for a human life. Letitia, grief-stricken but determined, vowed she would not let Tanya's story end as a mere statistic. She spoke to reporters, her voice steady despite the tears that streaked her cheeks. She was a mother, a sister, a friend. She deserved better. We're going to make sure the world knows what happened here. Her declaration spread quickly online, drawing support and anger in equal measure. Hashtags began trending. Protesters gathered outside the McDonald's. Too long, too long, too long. People were no longer whispering. They were demanding accountability. Meanwhile, inside the police department, the officers involved were on administrative leave, their actions under review. But the tension between the Williams family and law enforcement was only escalating. Legal experts were called in, witnesses were interviewed, surveillance footage, initially overlooked, was now under scrutiny. The story was no longer just about Tanya. It had become a symbol of systemic issues, of how the everyday lives of ordinary people could be disrupted in the blink of an eye. At the family home that night, the air was thick with grief and determination. Tanya's children sat quietly, their stuffed animals clutched tightly. Letitia paced, recounting the moments before the arrest over and over, trying to make sense of the senseless. Each retelling felt like a punch in the gut, yet each retelling strengthened their resolve. Too long, too long, too long. They would not let this end with silence. They would fight for Tanya. They would fight for truth. By the end of the night, the first murmurs of a legal battle began to form. The family's attorney assured them that a lawsuit could be filed. The officers' actions, the negligence, the disregard for Tanya's humanity, it could all be challenged. But even as hope flickered, the shadow of what had happened loomed large. A single mother lost to a brief moment of misunderstanding, or worse, prejudice. And an $8 million verdict hung on the horizon, waiting to vindicate a family determined to see justice done. The city was still buzzing with whispers about Tanya Williams. Every corner, every news tick, every social media post seemed to carry her name, her story, her tragedy. But behind the headlines, a quiet war was being waged, a meticulous battle for the truth. Tanya's family, led by Letitia, had assembled a team of investigators, lawyers, and forensic experts determined to uncover exactly what had happened in that McDonald's bathroom. The first breakthrough came with the security footage. At first glance, it seemed routine. Customers coming and going, the usual bustle. but slow-motion analysis revealed something chilling. Tanya had entered the restroom calmly, her children trailing close behind. Minutes later, the officers barged in, their movements sharp, aggressive, and disproportionate. There were no warnings, no attempts at de-escalation, just a swift, brutal confrontation. And in those precious seconds, Tanya's struggle began, her panicked movements ignored, her pleas unheeded. For Letitia, watching the footage was both horrifying and galvanizing. Her sister's life had been cut short in a place meant to be safe, and now, finally, proof existed that this was no accident. The officer's own actions were documented in black and white. Too long, too long, too long. Every frame screamed injustice, and with each replay, the family's resolve strengthened. Next came witness interviews. An older couple who had been seated nearby recalled the sounds of shouting, the harsh tones of the officers, the terrified voice of Tanya pleading, "Please, my kids are here." Teenagers who had been in line remembered filming the incident with their phones, their hands shaking as they spoke about the moment Tanya went silent. "She just collapsed," one said, voice trembling. I thought they were going to help her, but they didn't." Each account painted a vivid, consistent picture. Tanya had been restrained unnecessarily, her distress ignored, and the officers had escalated a minor situation into a fatal tragedy. Meanwhile, the medical examiner's report delivered damning evidence. Tanya had suffered from acute stress and asphyxiation caused by the physical restraint. The heart attack, the collapse, the death, it had all been preventable. Too long, too long, too long. The officers had not only misjudged the situation, they had allowed their bias to dictate their actions, turning a routine moment into a catastrophic outcome. As the investigation progressed, public outrage mounted. Protesters gathered outside the McDonald's, banners in hand, "Justice for Tanya," and "No more too long." Local media covered the story relentlessly, replaying clips from the security footage, publishing interviews with witnesses, and raising uncomfortable questions about the culture within the police department. Every revelation increased the pressure. Every new detail fueled anger, fear, and anticipation of accountability. But inside the family's living room, tension reached its peak. The legal team had just received an internal police report, one that tried to downplay the officers' actions. They claimed Tanya's behavior had been suspicious and that the restraint was standard procedure. Letitia slammed the report on the table. Standard procedure? She was a mother. She was in a bathroom. And now she's dead. Her voice shook, echoing the frustration, grief, and rage of a family who had lost too much. Then came the tipping point. An anonymous whistleblower from within the police department reached out. They handed over messages between the officers, casual comments reflecting a troubling mindset, a dismissive attitude toward citizens, coded language about making examples, and worrying references to race. This was not just negligence. This was bias in action, a system failing at the human level. Too long, too long, too long. Evidence piled up, creating an irrefutable narrative that the family's legal team would carry into court. As the days turned into weeks, the stakes grew higher. Public hearings were scheduled. Investigations by independent authorities began. The story of Tanya Williams was no longer just a local tragedy. It was becoming a national conversation about policing, bias, and accountability. The evidence, painstakingly gathered and meticulously verified, painted a damning portrait of negligence, prejudice, and systemic failure. And while her family grieved, they also prepared. Every document, every recording, every witness testimony was a step closer to the day they would finally hold the officers accountable and secure the $8 million justice that Tanya's life demanded. The courtroom was silent, the air thick with anticipation. Tanya Williams's family sat in the front row, hands clenched, hearts heavy, yet resolute. Reporters lined the walls, cameras flashing, capturing every moment of a trial that had captivated a nation. Months of investigation, evidence gathering, and relentless pursuit of truth had led to this moment. The officers who had taken Tanya's life once confident in their authority, now faced the scrutiny of a jury ready to decide her fate and the fate of justice itself. The prosecution opened with the security footage, each frame meticulously dissected. The images of Tanya, a mother, calm and unsuspecting, being restrained aggressively, played again and again. Her struggle, her desperate pleas, her collapse, they were undeniable. Witnesses were called to the stand, the couple seated nearby, the teenagers who had recorded the incident, hospital staff, and the whistleblower from within the police department. One by one, their testimonies built an unshakable narrative. Tanya had been treated unfairly, with a bias that turned a simple visit to the restroom into a fatal encounter. Too long, too long, too long. Each repetition drove the jury further into the truth. Letitia sat with her children, tears streaming down her face as the medical examiner recounted the cause of death. Acute stress and asphyxiation due to restraint, he said, voice grave. This was preventable. There were no external threats, no reason to escalate the situation. The courtroom murmured. Too long, too long, too long. The officers had acted recklessly, allowing prejudice and procedure to overshadow human life, and now the weight of their choices bore down in full measure. The defense tried to argue protocol, to deflect blame, to minimize the actions of the officers. But the evidence was unrelenting. Messages showing bias, witnesses describing the aggressive behavior, video footage, medical reports. The story was not just about procedure, it was about humanity, fairness, and accountability. And with each piece of evidence, the jury saw the truth. Tanya Williams had been a victim of systemic failure, and justice demanded recognition. After hours that felt like days, the jury returned. Silence enveloped the room as the foreperson rose. "We, the jury, find in favor of the plaintiff," they announced. The words hit the Williams family like a wave. $8 million. $8 million for a life taken too soon, for a family's pain acknowledged, for justice restored. Too long, too long, too long. The victory was not just financial, it was validation, vindication, and a statement to the world that prejudice has consequences. Outside the courthouse, supporters cheered. Reporters broadcasted the story live, and Tanya's children, clutching Letitia's hand, finally felt a measure of solace. "Mommy would be proud," whispered one. And though tears fell freely, there was a sense of closure, a hard-fought recognition that their mother's life mattered. The McDonald's. Where it all began became a symbol, not of tragedy alone, but of accountability. Community leaders spoke out, emphasizing that this was a moment to reflect, to demand better training, better awareness, and a justice system that protects the vulnerable rather than punishes them unfairly. Tanya Williams' story would remain a stark reminder of what happens when ordinary life collides with unchecked power, but also of what happens when persistence, courage, and truth meet the courtroom. If you believe that standing up for what's right can change everything, share this story and let others know that justice can prevail.
True justice is an evolving process, and awareness remains your strongest shield. We appreciate your viewership and dedication to clarity.